It started with something small, something so insignificant at first, I almost didn't notice. But as the days wore on, those little signs began to add up. I should have trusted my instincts sooner, but I didn't want to believe it. I never wanted to believe it. I never thought I'd be standing here, telling this story, but now it feels like the only thing I can do. The weight of it all is crushing. The secrets. The lies. The betrayal. It's not just what my son did that breaks me, it's the way he made me doubt myself, made me feel like I was crazy. How could I have missed it? How could I have been so blind? My son, my own flesh and blood, had been hiding something from me for months, something so deep, so destructive, that when I found out, it shattered everything I thought I knew about him. About us. I should have known. There had been moments, signs that should have stood out, but I brushed them off. He's my son. He would never hurt me. He was always the good kid, the one who did well in school, the one who helped around the house, the one who smiled when I needed it most. But now, I'm standing on the edge of something I can't take back. The truth is a beast. A dangerous, ugly thing, and it's coming for all of us. It all started with a phone call. A call that, in hindsight, was the moment I should have listened to the knot in my stomach. But back then, I was still holding on to the idea that everything was fine. Everything was normal. He had gone to college, come back for holidays, spent time with us, like he always had. There were no warning signs, at least none that seemed significant enough to cause alarm. But that phone call, that one phone call, was the beginning of everything falling apart. I remember it vividly. The sound of my son's voice on the other end of the line was strained, distant. He wasn't the same. The words were all there, but they didn't sound like him. There was an edge to his tone I'd never heard before, as if he was hiding something. Something big. It lingered in the air, thick and suffocating, but I pushed it aside. It couldn't be. I trusted him. I had to trust him. Then came the strange behavior. The long silences. The late-night phone calls I couldn't hear. The moments when he looked at me like he was hiding something, like he couldn't decide whether to tell me or not. I caught him in a few half-lies, but I didn't push it. I told myself that everyone goes through phases. He was a young adult, learning about life. But the gut feeling remained. Something was wrong. And then, one day, I found it. The thing that made it all make sense. A single text message, hidden among other meaningless conversations. It was the first crack in the facade. I wasn't supposed to see it. It wasn't meant for me. But it was there, plain as day. The message was simple, innocuous even, but it made everything fall into place. My son had been meeting someone I didn't know. And that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was the secrecy. The way he went out of his way to hide it, to keep it from me. It didn't sit right. It felt wrong. And in that moment, I knew. I knew there was more beneath the surface. I wasn't ready for what would come next, but the signs were undeniable. For weeks, I kept quiet, watching. Waiting. I wanted him to tell me. I wanted him to come clean. But he didn't. He kept up the lies, each one more convincing than the last. He looked me in the eyes and told me everything was fine. That there was nothing to worry about. I wanted to believe him. But I couldn't. My instincts were screaming at me to dig deeper, to uncover the truth. I confronted him once. A small, insignificant confrontation at first, one that I had hoped would clear the air. But when I asked him about it, he denied everything with such confidence, with such conviction, that I found myself questioning my own sanity. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. But something told me I was wrong, that I was being played. And that's when the real problem began. The emotional manipulation. He knew exactly how to pull my heartstrings, how to make me feel guilty for even asking the questions. He made me feel like a bad parent, like I was overstepping my bounds. He made me doubt my own judgment. But no matter how hard I tried to push it away, the truth kept gnawing at me, eating away at the edges of my mind. The lies were too perfect, too clean. No one is that good at keeping secrets, especially from a parent who's been there through everything. I knew him better than anyone. I thought I did, at least. And then came the turning point. The moment I could no longer ignore it. The moment I found the real truth. He thought he could get away with hiding everything from me, but I was about to uncover the lies, the betrayal, the secret he'd been keeping for months. It wasn't just a simple mistake. It wasn't just a bad choice. No, it was something far worse. Something that would change everything. The weight of it hit me like a truck, and I felt every bit of trust one had in him shatter. My son thought he had outsmarted me. He thought he could hide the truth forever, that I would never find out. But he was wrong. I was about to tear the lies wide open, and nothing would ever be the same again. And in that moment, as I stood on the edge of the truth, I realized the stakes were higher than I could have imagined. This was no longer just about a son and his parent. This was about uncovering a secret so deep, so dark, that once the truth came to light, there would be no going back. Why does this matter so much? What are the consequences? The truth is simple. Some secrets are too big to hide. And when they come to light, they don't just change the people involved. They change everything. It started with something small, something so insignificant at first, I almost did not notice. But as the days wore on, those little signs began to add up. I should have trusted my instincts sooner, but I did not want to believe it. I never wanted to believe it. I never thought I would be standing here, telling this story, but now it feels like the only thing I can do. The weight of it all is crushing. The secrets. The lies. The betrayal. It is not just what my son did that breaks me, it is the way he made me doubt myself, made me feel like I was crazy. How could I have missed it? How could I have been so blind? My son, my own flesh and blood, had been hiding something from me for months, something so deep, so destructive, that when I found out, it shattered everything I thought I knew about him. About us. I should have known. There had been moments, signs that should have stood out, but I brushed them off. He is my son. He would never hurt me. He was always the good kid, the one who did well in school, the one who helped around the house, the one who smiled when I needed it most. But now, I am standing on the edge of something I cannot take back. The truth is a beast. A dangerous, ugly thing, and it is coming for all of us. It all started with a phone call. A call that, in hindsight, was the moment I should have listened to the knot in my stomach. But back then, I was still holding on to the idea that everything was fine. Everything was normal. He had gone to college, come back for holidays, spent time with us, like he always had. There were no warning signs, at least none that seemed significant enough to cause alarm. But that phone call, that one phone call, was the beginning of everything falling apart. I remember it vividly. The sound of my son's voice on the other end of the line was strained, distant. He was not the same. The words were all there, but they did not sound like him. There was an edge to his tone I had never heard before, as if he was hiding something. Something big. It lingered in the air, thick and suffocating, but I pushed it aside. It could not be. I trusted him. I had to trust him. Then came the strange behavior. The long silences. The late-night phone calls I could not hear. The moments when he looked at me like he was hiding something, like he could not decide whether to tell me or not. I caught him in a few half-lies, but I did not push it. I told myself that everyone goes through phases. He was a young adult, learning about life. But the gut feeling remained. Something was wrong. And then, one day, I found it. The thing that made it all make sense. A single text message, hidden among other meaningless conversations. It was the first crack in the facade. I was not supposed to see it. It was not meant for me. But it was there, plain as day. The message was simple, innocuous even, but it made everything fall into place. My son had been meeting someone I did not know. And that was not even the worst part. The worst part was the secrecy. The way he went out of his way to hide it, to keep it from me. It did not sit right. It felt wrong. And in that moment, I knew. I knew there was more beneath the surface. I was not ready for what would come next, but the signs were undeniable. For weeks, I kept quiet, watching. Waiting. I wanted him to tell me. I wanted him to come clean. But he did not. He kept up the lies, each one more convincing than the last. He looked me in the eyes and told me everything was fine. That there was nothing to worry about. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. But something told me I was wrong, that I was being played. And that is when the real problem began. The emotional manipulation. He knew exactly how to pull my heartstrings, how to make me feel guilty for even asking the questions. He made me feel like a bad parent, like I was overstepping my bounds. He made me doubt my own judgment. But no matter how hard I tried to push it away, the truth kept gnawing at me, eating away at the edges of my mind. The lies were too perfect, too clean. No one is that good at keeping secrets, especially from a parent who has been there through everything. I knew him better than anyone. I thought I did, at least. And then came the turning point. The moment I could no longer ignore it. The moment I found the real truth. He thought he could get away with hiding everything from me, but I was about to uncover the lies, the betrayal, the secret he had been keeping for months. It was not just a simple mistake. It was not just a bad choice. No, it was something far worse. Something that would change everything. The weight of it hit me like a truck, and I felt every bit of trust one had in him shatter. My son thought he had outsmarted me. He thought he could hide the truth forever, that I would never find out. But he was wrong. I was about to tear the lies wide open, and nothing would ever be the same again. And in that moment, as I stood on the edge of the truth, I realized the stakes were higher than I could have imagined. This was no longer just about a son and his parent. This was about uncovering a secret so deep, so dark, that once the truth came to light, there would be no going back. Why does this matter so much? What are the consequences? The truth is simple. Some secrets are too big to hide. And when they come to light, they do not just change the people involved. They change everything. It was supposed to be a normal evening. The kind of evening where the world seemed still, where the hum of everyday life felt comforting and predictable. My son had come home for the weekend, just like he always did, and we were sitting down for dinner. The conversation was casual at first, nothing out of the ordinary. But then came that moment. A fleeting moment, but one that stayed with me long after the evening ended. He mentioned a name. A name I had never heard before. At first, I didn't think much of it. People come in and out of our lives all the time. But something about the way he said it made my stomach turn. He barely glanced at me when he spoke. And that's when I realized something was off. It was subtle, but it stuck with me. The tension in his voice, the way he avoided eye contact when I asked a simple follow-up question. For a moment, I thought I might be overreacting. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I had been around him long enough to know when he was hiding something. That name lingered in my mind like a faint, dissonant note that refuses to fade. I had to know more. But I could not ask him directly, not yet. I wasn't ready to confront him. So, I did what any concerned parent would do. I waited. The next few days were filled with normal interactions. He went out with friends, kept to his usual routine, but there was always that lingering doubt in the back of my mind. I found myself paying closer attention to every little detail. I watched him like a hawk, hoping to find a clue that would confirm my growing suspicion. It was exhausting, but I couldn't let go. The more I observed, the more I realized something was off. There were the odd moments where he seemed too eager to get away from the house, to avoid being around me. And then, there were the phone calls. I never eavesdropped on him, but sometimes, when he thought no one was listening, I could hear snippets of his conversations. He was always laughing, joking around, but it was the content of those conversations that began to trouble me. There was something about his tone, something that didn't match his usual self. He spoke in a way I didn't recognize, as if he was hiding a part of himself. I had to find out more. Then came the day I found the first piece of the puzzle. It was a Sunday, and he had left his phone on the kitchen counter while he went to take a shower. I don't know what made me pick it up, but I did. There was a message on the screen from that same name he had mentioned at dinner. I froze, reading the message over and over again. There was nothing too alarming in the text, nothing that screamed betrayal or deceit, but the fact that he had left the phone unlocked, that he hadn't even bothered to hide the messages, unsettled me. Why had he been so careless? I didn't know what to do next. Part of me wanted to confront him right then and there, demand answers. But another part of me feared what I might discover if I did. What if I was reading too much into this? What if I was overreacting? But then, I remembered the name, the way he had said it at dinner, the way he had looked away when I had asked about it. It wasn't just a name. It was a thread, and now I had to pull at it. So, I made a decision. I would wait. I would watch, listen, and gather more information. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find, but I had to know the truth. I had to know what he was hiding. The following week, the tension in the house grew. My son became more distant, more preoccupied. He had his reasons, of course, work, school, whatever it was that kept him busy. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was pulling away from me. That name haunted me, and so did the silence that followed every time I asked him about his day. I couldn't escape the growing sense of dread. I spent the next few days in a state of constant unease, searching for any sign that would confirm my suspicions. My mind raced with possibilities, each one darker than the last. What if he was hiding something dangerous? What if it was something illegal? What if he had gotten himself tangled up in something I could never undo? And then, one night, I found myself standing outside his bedroom door, listening to him on the phone again. This time, there was no laughter. There was only urgency in his voice, a sense of desperation. I couldn't hear the full conversation, but I knew enough. There was something going on, something he didn't want me to know. I felt a wave of panic wash over me. My heart was pounding in my chest, my mind racing with a million questions. Why didn't he tell me? Why was he keeping this from me? What had he gotten himself into? I wanted to confront him then, to demand answers. But I held back. I needed more. I needed the truth, and I was determined to find it, even if it meant digging deeper than I ever wanted to. Little did I know, I was about to uncover a secret so vast, so devastating, that it would change everything. And as I stood there, listening to the muffled voice of my son on the other side of the door, I realized I was already too far gone. The truth was out there, and I would stop at nothing to uncover it. But there was one thing I did not know. My son thought he could hide the truth from me forever. He thought I was blind, that I would never see what he had done. But I was about to show him just how wrong he was. The days that followed felt like a heavy fog rolling in, blurring everything around me. I tried to act normal, but it was hard to focus on anything else. I was consumed with the mystery, consumed with what I had yet to uncover. Each time my son spoke, every word seemed like an enigma, a puzzle I was meant to solve, but he kept shutting me out. I noticed the small things that slipped through the cracks, the inconsistencies that my mind couldn't ignore. Little things that didn't seem to fit, like the way he kept his phone so close to him now, always turned face down, never leaving it unattended. Or how, whenever I asked him where he had been or who he had been with, his answers felt rehearsed, too quick, as though he had prepared them ahead of time. It was all too perfect. And yet, it was all falling apart. I knew something was wrong, and I could feel the weight of that knowledge in every interaction. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, treading carefully, afraid that if I pushed too hard, if I asked too many questions, he would shut me out entirely. I had already seen him pull away. His smiles were no longer as genuine, his laughter forced. He was becoming a stranger in his own home, a stranger to me, and I couldn't stand it. I had to figure out what was going on. It was during one of these late nights, after everyone else had gone to bed, that I decided to do something I never thought I would. I could not wait anymore. I had to know the truth, even if it meant crossing a line I had promised myself I would never cross. His phone. I knew I was walking into dangerous territory. The privacy of my son was something I had always respected, but in that moment, respect felt like a luxury I could not afford. I stood in front of his bedroom door, hesitating, my hand hovering over the doorknob. What was I hoping to find? What if I was wrong? What if I was the one making a mistake? I shook the doubts away. The truth had to come out, one way or another. I took a deep breath and slowly opened the door. His room was dark, the only light coming from the dim glow of his phone screen, which lay on his desk, charging. My heart raced in my chest as I walked toward it. I picked up the phone, my hands trembling. The familiar sound of my breath filled the silence as I turned it on, trying to avoid the possibility of him hearing me. The screen lit up, and there it was, a message notification from the same name. I clicked it open before I had a chance to second-guess myself. The conversation was casual at first, nothing unusual. But then, I scrolled down further, and my blood ran cold. There it was, an exchange between my son and this person, discussing something that was far more than I could have imagined. Words like, meeting tonight, I'll bring the money, and everything's ready jumped out at me. My mind raced to piece it all together. Was he involved in something illegal? Was this connected to the secrecy, the late-night calls? The knot in my stomach tightened with each word I read. But it was the final message that made my heart stop. It was from my son. Don't worry, Mom will never find out. I've got it covered. I stared at the screen for a long time, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. How had he gotten to this point? What was he involved in? And why had he kept it hidden from me? The betrayal stung like a sharp knife to the chest, but there was something else. Something more dangerous lurking beneath the surface of those words. I felt sick. I should have put the phone down and walked away. I should have left his life and his secrets in his hands, as a parent should. But I could not. I needed more. I needed to understand. I could not live with this. Uncertainty gnawing at me, and if I was going to confront him, I had to know everything. I carefully opened his messages from earlier in the week, scrolling through the exchanges until I found more. The conversations were just as cryptic, references to places I did not recognize, people I had never heard of. And then, there it was. A picture. A picture that froze me in my tracks. It was of my son, standing in front of a building I recognized, his face a mix of excitement and something darker. And in his hands was a briefcase, the kind you never expect to see your child holding. I felt like the world was closing in on me. The last shred of the life I had known with him, the life I had believed in, was slipping away. I could not keep going. I had to confront him now, before everything fell apart completely. But how would I even begin? How would I ask him about this without making it worse? What if I was wrong, and this was all just some mistake? My mind raced with 1,000 possible outcomes, each one more terrifying than the last. The truth was right in front of me, and yet, I could not bring myself to face it. I closed the phone and set it back on the desk, taking one last look at my son, still fast asleep, oblivious to the storm I was about to unleash. I walked out of the room, my legs heavy with the weight of what I had just discovered. It was clear now that the world I thought I knew was nothing more than a facade. The lies had been building for months, and now the truth was coming to light in a way I had never imagined. But there was one thing I knew for sure: this was only the beginning. The moment I confronted him would change everything, and I had no idea what kind of person I would be once the dust settled. The lies were out in the open. And now, there was no going back. The next morning felt like a dream. Or rather, a nightmare. I walked through the house, my mind racing, trying to prepare myself for what was coming. How would I confront him? Would he deny everything again? Would he continue to lie, to hide behind his charm and excuses? Or would he finally crack under the weight of the truth? The silence between us felt suffocating, almost as though we were both holding our breath. I had the evidence. The undeniable proof that my son had been lying to me, hiding something so dark, so dangerous. But still, part of me hoped I was wrong. Part of me hoped I had misunderstood, that I was seeing things that weren't there. But deep down, I knew I wasn't wrong. The truth had been right there, staring me in the face, and now, I had no choice but to confront him. I waited until we were alone. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that made everything feel too loud, too real. He was in the kitchen, making himself a snack, as if nothing had changed. As if everything was still the same. But I knew better. I knew the truth, and now it was time to bring it into the light. I walked into the kitchen, trying to steady my breath. His back was turned, and I stood there for a moment, watching him, taking in the image of my son, the son I thought I knew, the son I loved so deeply. But now, I was about to shatter that image. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice steady but full of tension. He turned around, a smile on his face, but it didn't reach his eyes. I could see it now, the way he was trying so hard to maintain the facade. But I wasn't buying it anymore. "Of course," he said, his voice too calm, too rehearsed. "What's up?" I took a deep breath. "I know what you've been hiding," I said, my voice cracking with emotion. "I know about the money. The meetings. The lies. And I need to know why you didn't tell me. Why didn't you trust me enough to be honest with me?" The smile faded from his face, and for a moment, he seemed stunned. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. It was as if he was trying to figure out how to lie his way out of this, how to manipulate me once again. But I wasn't going to let him. I wasn't going to be manipulated anymore. "You've been lying to me." "For months," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "I saw the messages, I saw the pictures. You've been involved in something, and I need to know what it is. I need to understand why you've been keeping all of this from me." His eyes flickered with panic, but he quickly masked it, his expression turning defensive. "Mom, you don't know what you're talking about. You're just overreacting. It's not what you think." I felt the anger rising in me, but I pushed it down. I had to stay calm. I had to get to the truth, no matter how painful it was. "Don't lie to me, son. I've seen the evidence. You can't talk your way out of this anymore. What have you gotten yourself into? Who is that person you've been meeting with? What's going on?" His eyes shifted nervously. I could see the hesitation in his face, the way he was torn between telling the truth and trying to cover it up. For a brief moment, I thought he might tell me. But then he shook his head, looking me in the eyes with a calmness that chilled me to the bone. You wouldn't understand, he said, his voice flat. This isn't your business. I don't owe you an explanation. I felt the words hit me like a slap. He was shutting me out, shutting me down, just like that. The son I thought I knew, the one who had always come to me for advice, for support, was now pushing me away like I was nothing. Don't do this, son, I said, my voice softer now, but filled with hurt. I love you. You're my child. I've always been there for you. But now I don't even recognize you. What's going on? What have you gotten yourself involved in? He stepped back, running a hand through his hair, clearly trying to keep his composure. I can't tell you. Not yet. I'm sorry. I didn't want you to know. I didn't want you to worry. Worry? I almost laughed, though there was no humor in it. Worry? I've been worrying for months, wondering what the hell is going on with you. Wondering why you've been so distant, why you've been lying to me. Do you know how that feels? How it feels to be kept in the dark about your own son's life. He didn't say anything, but I could see the regret in his eyes. It was fleeting, but it was there. And in that moment, I knew something had shifted. He was no longer the confident, charming young man who could manipulate me into believing his lies. He was vulnerable now. And I was ready to make him face the consequences of his actions. You've been hiding something big from me, son, I said, my voice firm now, unwavering. And I deserve to know what it is. Whatever it is, we can figure it out together. But I can't help you if you keep lying to me. There was a long silence between us. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to suffocate. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I made some bad choices, he admitted, his eyes dropping to the floor. I got involved with some people. Things got out of hand. I didn't know how to get out of it, and I didn't want to drag you into it. I thought if I kept it a secret, everything would be okay. The truth hit me like a ton of bricks. My son, the one I had always trusted, had gotten tangled in something dangerous. Something illegal, perhaps. The people he had been meeting with, the money involved, everything I had suspected was true. He had lied to me, not out of malice, but out of fear. Fear of what would happen if I found out. And in his mind, keeping me in the dark was the only way to protect me. But now, I had the truth. And with it, the power to decide what came next. I'm not angry at you, son, I said quietly. But you've got to face what you've done. You've got to take responsibility for this. We'll figure this out together, but you have to be honest with me now. No more lies. He nodded slowly, tears welling up in his eyes. I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. I just didn't know how to tell you. I walked over to him, placing my hand on his shoulder. We'll get through this. But you have to promise me one thing, no more secrets. No more lies. I promise, he whispered. And in that moment, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. But at least, for the first time in months, I felt like I had my son back. The relief from our confrontation was brief. In the weeks that followed, everything I thought I understood about my son and the world we shared was turned upside down. What had started as a quiet secret buried deep in his life had quickly grown into something that could no longer be ignored. His admission, though a step toward honesty, was only the beginning of the chaos that would unfold. The phone calls began again, only now, they were from lawyers, not friends. The first call came 3 days after the confrontation. The voice on the other end was calm but firm, a stranger's voice that carried the weight of something much larger than I could comprehend at that moment. We need to discuss your son's involvement in an ongoing investigation. We have reason to believe he's connected to a larger operation. I'd advise you to meet with us as soon as possible. The words felt like a punch to the stomach. I hadn't prepared for this. How had things gone from bad to worse so quickly? The secret my son had tried so hard to protect had grown into something that could ruin his future, and mine too. The truth was now tangled in a mess of legal battles, shady business deals, and a danger I hadn't anticipated. He wasn't just involved with the wrong crowd. He was caught up in something much darker, something criminal. The emotional toll this took on me was beyond anything I had imagined. I could no longer protect him by simply being his mother. Now, I had to figure out how to protect him from himself, from the mess he had made of his life. I wasn't ready for the reality of a courtroom. I hadn't prepared for the guilt I would feel, the overwhelming sense of responsibility that came with knowing I could have done more, could have seen the signs sooner. The hardest part was seeing my son, the same boy who once looked up to me for guidance, now facing a future that seemed darker than any of us could have imagined. As the investigation continued, more and more pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The meetings he had kept secret, the money, the dangerous individuals, everything began to form a pattern. The lawyer explained it to me step by step, the legal intricacies that were involved, but all I could think about was how far my son had gone. The good kid I had known had been replaced by someone else, someone I did not fully recognize. And what hurt more than the legal implications was the emotional manipulation that started to unfold within my own home. His charm, the same charm that had gotten him out of trouble so many times, was still there, but now it felt like a weapon. He knew how to make me feel guilty, how to make me believe that somehow, this was all my fault. Mom, if you hadn't gotten so involved, maybe I could have handled it myself. If you just trusted me, he would say, his voice low, laced with sadness and frustration. I didn't want to disappoint you. I didn't want you to worry. At first, I almost believed him. I had raised him to be independent, to make his own choices. I had trusted him to know the difference between right and wrong. But now, I could see it, he wasn't just hiding from me. He was manipulating me, pulling me back into his web of lies. He wasn't asking for help. He was asking for forgiveness, for the chance to continue hiding, to avoid facing the consequences of his actions. It wasn't just the lawyer calling now. His friends, the ones I had never met but had always heard about, began to surface. They called, texted, and sent messages, all the while pushing him to take care of things his own way, to avoid getting tangled up in the mess he had created. And in the background, I could hear the guilt heaped on him. You know what's at stake. You know we can't back out now. I tried to remain firm. I tried to remind myself that I had to be strong for him, that I could not let him manipulate me anymore. But it wasn't easy. Every day, he tugged at my heartstrings. Every word and every gesture made me feel like I was the one responsible for his downfall. The emotional weight of watching him crumble under the pressure of his own lies was unbearable. But still, I held my ground. I had to. The court dates loomed over us, and with each one, my son's anxiety grew. I could see it in his eyes, he was scared, but not of the truth. He was scared of the consequences, of the punishment he knew he would face. But what terrified him more than anything was the loss of the life he had built with lies. The lies that had become his reality. We sat in the courtroom on the first day, the air thick with tension. His legal team sat in one corner, his friends, the ones who had been in the background all this time, were scattered around the room, their eyes darting nervously. And then, there was my son, his hands clenched tightly, his shoulders hunched as if bracing for the impact of everything he had been hiding. The judge's gavel fell, and the proceedings began. I sat there, my heart racing, not knowing how this was going to play out. All I could think about was how much I wanted to take this burden from him. I wanted to say it wasn't his fault, that this wasn't who he was, that he had made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but a mistake nonetheless. But I knew better than to believe that. What he had done was bigger than any mistake. It was a deliberate choice, and now he had to face the consequences. As the trial continued, I watched my son become more distant. His once carefree attitude was gone, replaced with a quiet, almost haunted expression. The more the prosecutor presented evidence, the more his face hardened. He knew it was over. There was no more running, no more hiding. He would have to face the full weight of his actions. And yet, in those quiet moments between the court sessions, he would still try to reach out, to pull me back into his world of excuses and blame. I never meant for any of this to happen, Mom. I didn't want it to go this far. I was just trying to keep things under control. But there was no controlling this. The truth was out, and no amount of manipulation could take that away. The hardest part came when the prosecutor asked me to testify. I had to speak in front of a room full of strangers, recounting everything I had learned, every piece of evidence I had uncovered, all the moments I had missed. I was forced to face the truth, to admit that I had failed to see the signs earlier, to accept the part one had played in his choices. My son sat there, his head hung low, his shame evident. And as I spoke, I saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes. He knew I was doing this for him. I wasn't just trying to punish him. I was trying to save him, to show him that there were consequences to every action, that the truth could never be hidden forever. But as the trial dragged on, one thing became clear to me: we were both in this together. This wasn't just his fight. It was mine too. And no matter what happened, no matter how this ended, I had to be strong for both of us. The truth had come to light, and now it was time for both of us to face it. The court proceedings had taken their toll on both of us. Every day felt like a slow march towards something inevitable, something painful that neither of us was truly ready to face. As each piece of evidence was revealed, I watched my son shrink further into himself. It wasn't just the legal consequences that haunted him now, though they were a heavy burden. It was the weight of his choices, the knowledge that the people he trusted, the people who had stood by him in the darkness, were now the ones who were going to bring him down. But as the truth continued to unfold, so did the shocking reality of how deep he had gotten in. Every conversation, every hidden detail I had missed now stood out like a neon sign. The people he had been meeting with were not just associates from his school or friends from the neighborhood. They were dangerous, manipulative, and connected to something far more sinister. A network of lies and criminal activity that spanned far beyond the boundaries of anything I could have imagined. The more I learned, the more sickened I became. He had been living a double life, one that I had been completely unaware of. The carefully constructed facade, the well-behaved son I had always believed in, was nothing more than a mask. What had started as small lies had evolved into something catastrophic. And now, everything he had built, every relationship he had formed, was at risk of falling apart. But what hurt more than the criminal activities or the hidden dangers was the fact that my son had kept this from me. He had made the conscious decision to protect himself, to shield me from the truth by lying to me. He hadn't trusted me. He hadn't trusted the love I had always offered him. And in doing so, he had pulled away from me in the most painful way imaginable. I spent nights going through the evidence with the lawyer, sifting through documents, texts, phone records, anything that could give us a fighting chance in court. And each discovery felt like a new blow, each revelation another crack in the foundation of our relationship. I kept thinking back to the small things I had noticed, the missed phone calls, the strange hours, the unexplained absences. I should have seen it earlier, I told myself. I should have recognized the warning signs. But the more I uncovered, the more I realized that he had been so good at hiding it, so skilled at deceiving everyone around him, including me. I wasn't just a victim of his lies. I was complicit, too. One evening, after a particularly grueling day in court, I found myself standing in front of his bedroom door once more. This time, I didn't hesitate. I didn't knock. I just opened it. He was sitting at his desk, his back to me, his face hidden in his hands. The weight of everything was finally sinking in, and I knew it. He wasn't pretending anymore. The confidence he had once exuded had crumbled. There was no bravado now, no games. He was simply a young man facing the consequences of his choices, and the realization was breaking him. "Mom, I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I never meant for it to get this far." I stood there in the doorway, unable to speak at first. My heart was heavy, but I refused to let it consume me. Not now. Not when I knew that confronting the truth was the only way forward for both of us. "You should have come to me, son," I said, my voice firm but pained. "I would have helped you. You didn't have to carry all of this alone." His shoulders shook slightly as he lifted his head, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with regret. "I thought I could fix it. I thought I could handle it. But I couldn't. I was afraid of what you would think of me, of what would happen if you found out." It was the first time he had ever admitted to his fear. It wasn't just about facing the law. It was about facing me. It was about the loss of trust between us, the damage done by his secrecy. And in that moment, I saw the depth of his vulnerability, the weight of his guilt. He wasn't a villain. He was a young man who had made terrible choices, but he was still my son. The boy I had raised. "I never wanted to disappoint you," he continued, his voice cracking. "But I did. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't want to hurt you." I stepped into the room, crossing the distance between us. I placed a hand on his shoulder, the touch almost as comforting for me as it was for him. "Everything you've done has consequences," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was breaking inside. "But this doesn't define who you are. You made mistakes, and now you have to face them. But I'm still here. And I always will be." For a moment, he didn't say anything. He just sat there, staring at the floor, as if trying to make sense of everything he had done, everything he had lost. I could see the weight of it all, pressing down on him, threatening to crush him. But I couldn't fix it. I couldn't take away the consequences, and I couldn't erase the past. All I could do was help him move forward, help him rebuild. "You'll get through this," I said softly. "We'll get through this together. But you have to face the truth, all of it. No more hiding, no more lies." He nodded slowly, the words sinking in, the understanding that this was bigger than both of us settling on him. There was no going back. But there was still hope. We could still move forward. The truth had been ugly, but it had also been liberating. And now, we had to confront what came next. "I'll do whatever it takes," he whispered, his voice filled with determination. "I'll make it right." And as I looked at him in that moment, I realized that while the road ahead would be difficult, the journey to redemption had already begun. The truth, as painful as it was, had set us on a path of healing. And as long as we continued facing it together, there was a chance, however small, that we could rebuild what had been broken. The secrets had unraveled. And now, the real work of rebuilding trust, of making things right, had just begun. The days after that moment were like walking through a storm. There was no more pretending, no more hiding. It was just us, faced with the truth, and the consequences of those truths that would not be easily undone. The courtroom dates loomed larger, and the pressure mounted. My son was not only facing the legal repercussions of his actions, but also the deep emotional fallout. And as much as I tried to support him, there were times when I wondered if it was too late, if the damage had already been done beyond repair. We spent hours going over his defense, piecing together the story he would tell in court. His lawyer tried to minimize the damage, to find any loophole that could lessen the punishment, but the weight of his involvement in something criminal was undeniable. The evidence was damning, and no amount of legal maneuvering could change that. And yet, he remained hopeful. He told me over and over that he could handle it, that he was ready to take responsibility, no matter the cost. But I saw the fear in his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. He was terrified. Terrified not of the legal outcome, but of the loss of everything he had worked for, the trust, the love, the future he had once thought was his for the taking. On the day of the final hearing, I could feel the tension in my bones. The courtroom was full, the air thick with the gravity of the situation. I had been to court before, for minor things, but this was different. This was my son, standing on the edge of his future, waiting to find out if it would crumble beneath him or if he would be given a second chance. The courtroom was cold, and as we entered, I noticed the faces around me. Some were sympathetic, others stern. The prosecutor sat across from us, a professional mask on his face. He was determined to make sure the law took its course, to ensure that my son faced the consequences of his actions. The judge, too, was impartial, though I could see the weariness in his eyes. He had seen cases like this before, but each one felt like its own tragedy. My son sat beside me, his eyes downcast, his hands trembling. I could feel the cold sweat on his palms as he gripped the chair, fighting to keep himself together. This was it. The moment of truth. The moment that would determine everything. The consequences of his choices were about to be handed down, and no one, least of all him, knew what the outcome would be. The trial was long and intense. The prosecutor laid out the evidence in meticulous detail, each point more damning than the last. The money, the meetings, the illegal transactions. It was all there, clear as day, and there was no denying my son's involvement. The judge listened quietly, asking questions when necessary, but his expression never wavered. He was a man of law, and the law was clear. And then, when it was finally my son's turn to speak, I could see the panic rising in him. He stood up, his legs shaky, his voice barely above a whisper. I know I made mistakes, he said, his voice cracking. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I never meant for things to get this far. But I got involved in something I couldn't control. And I don't know how to fix it. I just want to make it right. The words hung in the air, and I could feel my heart breaking for him. He wasn't just apologizing for what he had done. He was apologizing for all of it, the lies, the secrecy, the broken trust. I could see the guilt in his eyes, the realization that everything he had tried to protect had been shattered. But it wasn't just his future at stake. It was ours. It was mine, too. The prosecutor stood up to cross-examine him, his voice sharp, cutting through the raw emotion of my son's words. Do you understand the gravity of your actions, Mr. Carter? You didn't just break the law. You betrayed the people who trusted you. You put them at risk. And now, you sit here asking for sympathy? The words stung, and I could see my son wince, his face reddening with shame. But it was true. There was no easy way out. The damage had been done. And now, he would have to face the consequences, no matter how much it hurt. The courtroom grew tense as the judge deliberated. My son's fate was hanging in the balance, and I could feel the weight of it crushing me, too. I had done everything I could to help him, to guide him, but in the end, it was his choices that had led us here. All I could do was sit there, hoping that somehow, the judge would see the boy I once knew, the boy who had made a mistake, not a criminal. The judge finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. Mr. Carter, your actions have caused harm to not only yourself but to those who trusted you. However, I am willing to offer you a second chance, given your age and your willingness to accept responsibility. You will face a reduced sentence, but there will be conditions. You will enter rehabilitation, and you will work to repair the damage you've caused. If you fail to do so, the full extent of the law will be applied. I heard my son exhale, a sound that was almost a gasp of relief. The sentence wasn't as harsh as it could have been, but it was still a heavy blow. The road to redemption would not be easy. It would take years of hard work, of proving to everyone, including himself, that he could change. As we left the courtroom, my son turned to me, his eyes wide with a mixture of gratitude and fear. I don't deserve this, Mom, he whispered. I don't deserve your forgiveness. You don't have to deserve it, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. I will always love you, no matter what. But you have to prove that you're ready to make things right. You have to work for it. And with those words, we stepped into a new chapter. One filled with uncertainty and pain, but also with hope. Hope that he could rebuild his life, that we could rebuild what had been lost. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worth having ever is. But for the first time in months, I felt the smallest flicker of belief that maybe, just maybe, everything could be okay again. The battle was far from over, but the first step toward redemption had been taken. And that was enough for now. The days following the trial were filled with a strange mix of relief and lingering fear. It was as if the weight of what had just happened was still pressing down on me, but I could finally breathe again. My son's sentence wasn't as harsh as I had feared, but the road ahead was still long. There were no guarantees. The future was uncertain, and while the burden of guilt seemed to be lifting, I could not shake the feeling that it was only a temporary reprieve. The first few weeks after the court ruling were the hardest. My son had been enrolled in a rehabilitation program, a mandatory step, a chance to prove that he could change, that he could take responsibility for his actions. Every day was a struggle. The guilt he carried, the shame of his own behavior, made him distant at times. I saw glimpses of the boy I had known, the one who still had a spark of hope in his eyes, but I also saw a young man consumed with self-doubt, questioning whether he could ever make things right again. There were moments when he would sit in silence, his hands clenched tightly, his brow furrowed as if wrestling with demons from his past. I could see it, the weight of his choices hanging on him, pulling him deeper into the darkness. But then, there were moments of breakthrough, however small. A conversation in which he opened up, admitting how scared he was of failing. A quiet apology after a long day of frustration. Each small moment was a step forward, even if it didn't feel like it. I tried to remain as supportive as I could. I knew that, at this point, he needed more than just a parent. He needed someone who believed in him, someone who wouldn't give up on him when the world seemed to be closing in. And while it was difficult, I knew I couldn't walk away. This was my son, my flesh and blood, and he had made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but that didn't mean it was the end for him. But it wasn't just about him. It was about me, too. I had to confront my own feelings of betrayal, my own fears about how this had changed everything. How could I ever trust him the way I once did? How could I ever forget what I had discovered? The anger and pain I had felt, the disappointment, those things didn't just disappear with the verdict. They were still there, simmering beneath the surface. There were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my mind. I could feel the emotional scars that were left behind. But I knew that in order to heal, I had to forgive. Forgive him. Forgive myself. It wasn't easy, and I didn't know if I was ready, but I had to try. If we were going to move forward, we both needed to let go of the past and focus on the future. The first real breakthrough came one evening after he had been to his rehab group session. He came home exhausted but different, his eyes were clear, his shoulders less tense. He sat down next to me, and for the first time in months, he didn't say anything to excuse his actions. He didn't try to justify himself. He just looked at me, and then he said the words I had been waiting to hear. Mom, I've been thinking a lot. I don't know if I can ever fully fix what I've done, but I'm going to try. I'm not going to give up. And I'll keep trying. I swear. It was a small promise, but it was the most important thing he had said since everything had gone wrong. It wasn't about making everything right in one go. It wasn't about undoing the damage instantly. It was about the willingness to fight, to keep moving forward despite the mistakes, despite the pain. And in that moment, I knew that he wasn't just talking to me. He was talking to himself, too. I took a deep breath, looking at him with a mixture of sadness and hope. I believe you, son. But it's going to take time. You can't expect everything to be fixed overnight. But I'll be here. Every step of the way. And so, the slow, painful journey of healing began. The weeks turned into months, and with each passing day, my son grew stronger. He began to take his rehabilitation seriously, attending his meetings, working on his issues, and seeking professional help. But more than that, he began to reconnect with the world. He started reaching out to the people he had hurt, the ones he had lied to, and began making amends. It wasn't always easy, and there were setbacks, but every time he faced his mistakes head-on, he grew a little more. He learned what it meant to take responsibility, to truly make things right, not just for himself, but for everyone he had wronged. As for me, I found my own healing. I wasn't the same person I had been before all of this happened. I couldn't be. But I was stronger in ways I hadn't imagined. I had learned what it meant to truly face the truth, no matter how painful it was. I had learned that love wasn't about perfect choices or perfect people, it was about standing by each other, even when the world falls apart. One evening, a few months after the trial, my son and I sat together in the living room, both of us quieter than usual. The air between us wasn't tense anymore. It was peaceful, but there was still an unspoken understanding that we had both been through a storm we would never forget. "I know it's not going to be easy," he said quietly, "but I want to rebuild what we had. I want to earn your trust again. I don't know how long it will take, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes." And in that moment, as I looked at him, this young man, who had once been my child, who had made mistakes but was finally taking ownership of them, I realized that redemption wasn't something that happened instantly. It wasn't a destination. It was a journey, one that would be filled with more pain, more struggles, but also more growth. "I believe in you," I said, my voice steady, but my heart full of emotions I could barely describe. "But trust is something that's built over time. We'll get there, but we have to take it one step at a time." And so, we did. One step at a time. The truth had come out. It had destroyed everything we thought we knew about ourselves, about each other. But in its wake, it had also given us a chance to rebuild. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. We didn't need to erase the past, but we could change our future. Together. The road ahead would be long, and we both knew there would be moments when the past would rear its ugly head. But we had come through the storm. And as long as we were willing to face the truth, together, there was nothing we couldn't overcome. The healing had begun. And with it, a new chapter. One of hope, redemption, and the quiet understanding that love, though tested, would always find a way. The months that followed were quiet but not easy. My son and I had made our peace, or at least, we were in the process of it. There were no sudden bursts of joy or grand gestures of reconciliation. It was more subtle than that, more like a slow, steady rebuild after a storm had ravaged everything in its path. Some days were harder than others. But we kept moving forward. Each morning, I woke up to find my son at the kitchen table, notebook open, pen in hand. He was working on himself, on fixing what had been broken, not just the legal issues, but the emotional ones, the trust between us, the shattered pieces of our relationship. I watched him, and while there were still moments of doubt, moments when I questioned whether he could truly change, I couldn't deny the effort he was putting in. He began to attend counseling regularly, even when he felt like skipping. I watched him change, little by little, piece by piece. He stopped hiding things. He started to talk more, to share what was really on his mind, even if it was difficult. There were times when the conversations got awkward, when the silence between us felt too thick to cut through. But he was trying. That was all I could ask for. We began to repair the smaller things, the things I had taken for granted before. He started calling me just to check in, even when he didn't have to. He'd ask how my day was, something so simple, but it made all the difference. It was a small thing, but it was real progress. We would spend more time together, not talking about the past, but just being present in each other's lives. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. But the real turning point came one evening, when my son finally made the decision to confront the people who had influenced him, the ones who had been the root cause of the darkness he had gotten tangled in. I didn't know if he was ready for that. I didn't know if anyone was ever truly ready to face the people who had betrayed them. But he told me that he needed to do this. He needed to take full responsibility for his actions, even if it meant confronting those who had led him down this path. "I'm not doing this for them," he said one night as we sat at the table, his voice soft but determined. "I'm doing it for myself. I have to take control of my life again, and I can't do that if I keep letting them control me." I understood what he meant. The people he had surrounded himself with were nothing but distractions, traps that kept him from growing, from moving forward. They were toxic influences, people who had made him feel small, vulnerable, and lost. And now, he was ready to break free from them. To sever the ties that had kept him shackled to his past mistakes. The next week, I watched as he reached out to those people, one by one. Some of them were angry, some indifferent, but none of them offered him the redemption he was seeking. Instead, they tried to manipulate him one last time, tried to pull him back into their web of lies. But he didn't fall for it. He stood his ground, even when it hurt. And in the end, he walked away. When he came back that night, I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time: peace. It was subtle, but it was there. He was no longer burdened by the weight of their expectations or their lies. He had freed himself, and in doing so, he had freed me too. That night, he sat down with me and said, "I feel like I can breathe again, Mom. Like I'm not trapped anymore." And in that moment, I realized that the healing process wasn't just about him. It was about me, too. It was about both of us finding our way back to each other, finding a new way to be in each other's lives, without the shadows of the past looming over us. We were rebuilding, not just his future, but ours. It wasn't an easy road, and there were still moments of uncertainty, of fear, that crept up on us. But we had learned one thing in the process: redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about confronting it, accepting it, and then deciding that it would not define who we were or who we could become. We had both made mistakes. But we were both willing to face the truth. And that, in itself, was enough to set us on a new path. Months turned into a year, and as I watched my son flourish, finding his place in the world again, I realized just how much he had changed. Not because of me, not because of anyone else, but because of his own choices. His own decision to take responsibility for the things he had done, to look the world in the face and say, "I'm not perfect. But I'm trying." It was a lesson I had learned too, that sometimes, in order to move forward, we have to let go of the past. We have to forgive, not just others, but ourselves. And in doing so, we open ourselves up to a new kind of freedom. There would always be moments of doubt, moments when we wondered if we were truly free from the weight of what had happened. But for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. I felt like we had a future to look forward to. Not one that was perfect, but one where the truth was no longer a hidden thing. Where the past was no longer a secret we were running from, but a part of our story we could face together. And as I stood beside my son, watching him take the next step in his journey, I knew that no matter what came next, we had already won. We had both found redemption, not in some grand, miraculous moment, but in the quiet, slow work of facing the truth, of rebuilding, and of loving each other through it all. The storm had passed. And now, there was peace. The years that followed were a testament to the slow, patient work of rebuilding trust, of rebuilding ourselves. It wasn't always smooth, and there were times when we both stumbled, when the weight of the past tried to pull us back. But with each new day, we learned how to stand stronger, how to keep moving forward, even when it felt like we were walking on unfamiliar ground. My son started to forge a new life. His rehabilitation wasn't just about the programs or the sessions. It was about him learning to live in the world without hiding, without running from his past mistakes. He found a job, not a glamorous one, but a place where he could start again, where he could prove to himself, and to others, that he was capable of making the right choices. He began to build relationships with people who supported him, people who held him accountable but also encouraged him. It wasn't perfect. There were moments when the temptation to slip back into old habits, old ways of thinking, would resurface. But every time, he fought against it. Every time, he chose to face the challenge instead of running from it. And that was something I could be proud of. But it wasn't just his transformation that struck me. It was my own. I had changed, too. I had learned to forgive, not just him, but myself. I had spent so many years holding on to guilt that I hadn't seen the signs, guilt that I hadn't protected him better, guilt that I hadn't known how to help him sooner. But as I watched him fight for his future, I realized that those feelings of guilt were no longer serving me. I had done the best I could with the information I had. I had loved him with everything I had, even when it felt like that love wasn't enough. And that was all I could offer. Our relationship began to heal in ways I hadn't expected. It was no longer defined by the lies and secrets that had once torn us apart. Instead, it was grounded in something more genuine. Trust, once shattered, was being rebuilt, brick by brick. It was a delicate process, and sometimes I wondered if we would ever fully trust each other again. But as time went on, the small moments began to add up, the quiet conversations, the shared laughter, the way we could sit in the same room and just be. And slowly, without even realizing it, I found that I trusted him again. Not perfectly, not without hesitation, but enough to know that we could move forward without being haunted by the past. There were days when I would look at him, now an adult, standing on his own, and I would marvel at the person he had become. He wasn't perfect, but neither was I. And maybe, in a strange way, that imperfection was what made our bond even stronger. We had both been through hell and come out the other side, scarred but stronger, wiser. And then, one evening, a few years after everything had unfolded, my son came to me with a quiet request. He had been accepted into a college program, something he had never thought possible before. The thought of it terrified him, but it also excited him. It was a chance to build a future, to show the world, and most importantly, himself, that he was capable of something greater than his past mistakes. "I don't know if I can do this, Mom," he said one night, his voice unsure. "I don't know if I'm ready." I looked at him, really looked at him, and in that moment, I realized just how far he had come. "You're ready," I said, my voice firm with belief. "You've already done the hardest part. You've faced your mistakes. You've chosen to grow. This is just the next step." He smiled at me, a small, hesitant smile, but it was genuine. "Thanks, Mom. For everything." And I realized, in that moment, that he had forgiven himself. That he had moved past the guilt and shame, and was finally ready to embrace the future. And in that, I found my own peace. I had been afraid that this day would never come, that the damage done would be too great to overcome. But we had made it. We had both made it. The night before he left for college, we sat together in the living room. It felt different now, the air between us lighter, freer. We didn't need to speak about the past, it was behind us. Instead, we talked about the future that lay ahead of him and the one we would share, even from a distance. "I'll miss you," he said quietly, his eyes sincere. "I'll miss you too," I replied, my heart full. "But I know you're going to do great things. I know you're going to make a difference in this world." And as I hugged him one last time before he left, I realized that love wasn't just about being there in the good times. It wasn't just about the moments of joy and laughter. Love was about standing together through the darkest storms, facing the truth, no matter how painful, and finding a way to rebuild. Love was about forgiveness, about giving each other the chance to grow, to change, to make things right. As the car drove away the next morning, I stood at the window, watching him disappear down the road, and I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't known in years. It wasn't the end of the story, not by a long shot. But it was a new beginning. A beginning built on truth, on trust, and on the unshakable foundation of love. And as I turned away from the window and looked around the house, I realized that, in many ways, we had both found the freedom we needed. Not the freedom to escape the past, but the freedom to face it and move forward. Together. This, I thought, is what redemption looks like. And it was enough. The journey had been long and painful. There were no simple answers, no easy fixes, and no shortcuts. My son's mistakes had cost him more than just his freedom, they had cost him trust, his sense of self, and, in many ways, his future. But as time passed, I realized that what we both needed wasn't just for the past to disappear, it was for us to confront it, to learn from it, and to move forward with the lessons we had learned. My son was no longer the boy who had tried to hide from the truth. He was someone who had taken responsibility for his actions, someone who was fighting every day to rebuild the life he had nearly lost. The road wasn't always easy, and I knew it never would be, but it was real. It was honest. There were days when the scars of what had happened still stung, when we both had to wrestle with our past mistakes. But the strength was in the forgiveness, the willingness to face the truth, no matter how ugly, and choose to grow from it. We had both done that, and for the first time in a long time, we were walking on a path of healing. As I watched him move forward, step by step, I realized something important. Redemption was not about erasing the past, it was about learning to live with it. It was about accepting what had happened, understanding the consequences, and using that understanding to build a future based on truth, integrity, and love. My son had made his share of mistakes, and I had made mine. But together, we had found a way to move forward, to rebuild our relationship and our lives. The truth had set us both free, not in the way we expected, but in the way we needed. And now, as I looked at him, standing on the threshold of a new chapter in his life, I knew that no matter what the future held, we had both found the strength to face it. The past would always be there, but it no longer controlled us. The future was ours to shape, one step at a time. In the end, the story was not just about a son and a parent, it was about two people who had been broken and were learning to heal together. And that, I realized, was the greatest gift we could give each other.